I was standing on my private dock at Lake Martin, Alabama, watching the sunrise paint the water gold when I heard the unmistakable rumble of heavy machinery coming down my driveway. My coffee mug paused halfway to my lips as a massive excavator rounded the corner of my lakefront property, followed by a demolition crew in matching yellow vests. Behind them, a silver Mercedes SUV pulled up, and out stepped Margaret Sullivan, the president of the Timber Shores Homeowners Association, clipboard in hand and a smile that could freeze hell. "Good morning, Henry," she called out cheerfully, her voice cutting through the peaceful morning like a chainsaw. "I hope we didn't wake you. We're here to take care of that eyesore you've got extending into the lake." I set my coffee down on the dock railing, my brain struggling to process what was happening. "Margaret, what the hell are you talking about? This is my dock. It's on my property." She laughed, a high-pitched sound that made my teeth hurt. "Oh, Henry Harrington, you clearly haven't been reading your HOA newsletters. This dock is a complete violation of our new aesthetic guidelines. The board voted unanimously last month. All waterfront structures must be uniform, matching the approved beige and white color scheme. Your dock is natural wood, and frankly, it sticks out like a sore thumb." I looked at my dock, the one I'd built myself 3 years ago with pressure-treated lumber, the one that had cost me $15,000 in materials alone, the one I'd gotten all the proper permits for from the county. "This is insane. You can't just demolish my property." "Actually, we can." Margaret flipped through her clipboard with practiced efficiency. Section 47. Subsection C of the revised HOA covenant states that the Architectural Review Committee has full authority to remove any structures deemed aesthetically incompatible with community standards. "You received notice via email 3 weeks ago." "I never got any email," I said, my voice rising. The excavator operator was already climbing into his cab, and the demolition crew was approaching my dock with crowbars and sledgehammers. "Well, that's not our problem. Perhaps you should check your spam folder more often." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "The good news is, once this monstrosity is removed, you'll be eligible to apply for approval to build a new dock that meets our standards. The application fee is only $5,000, and the approval process typically takes 6 to 8 months. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking with anger. "I'm calling my lawyer right now. You people can't do this." "Go right ahead," Margaret said, completely unfazed. "But I should warn you, attempting to interfere with authorized HOA improvements is a violation that carries a fine of $500 per day. The crew is on a tight schedule. We have 3 other docks to demolish today." The excavator's engine roared to life, and I watched in horror as the massive machine rolled toward the water's edge. My dock had been my sanctuary, the place where I launched my boat every weekend, where I'd taught my nephew to fish last summer, where I'd spent countless peaceful evenings watching the sunset. And now, it was about to be reduced to splinters by an HOA gone mad with power. "At least let me get my stuff off of it," I shouted over the engine noise. Margaret checked her watch. "You have 5 minutes." I ran down the dock, grabbing the life preservers, fishing rods, and the small storage box I kept bolted near the end. My hands were trembling as I fumbled with the lock. The whole situation felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I'd moved to Timber Shores 2 years ago specifically because of the lake access. I'd paid a premium for waterfront property, and now the HOA was literally destroying my ability to enjoy it. As I hauled my belongings up to the lawn, the excavator's massive claw took its first bite out of my dock. The sound of splintering wood echoed across the water, and I felt each crack like a physical blow. Within minutes, The machine was ripping through the structure with brutal efficiency, reducing 3 years of work to a pile of broken lumber floating in the shallows. I immediately called Tom Bradley, my attorney, who'd handled the closing on my house. He listened to my frantic explanation with growing concern. "Henry, this is bad," he said. "But if they sent you notification, even if you didn't see it, and it's in the HOA covenants you signed when you bought the property, they might technically be within their rights. I need to review your HOA documents immediately. Can you send me everything you have? They're destroying my dock right now, Tom. Right this second. Document everything. Photos, videos, witnesses if you have them, but don't physically interfere. That'll just make things worse legally." So I stood there, filming on my phone as the excavator demolished my dock piece by piece, while Margaret supervised with the satisfied expression of someone who genuinely believed she was improving the neighborhood. The whole operation took less than 40 minutes. By the time the sun had fully risen, my dock was gone, replaced by a scatter of broken wood and twisted metal where the pilings had been. "All done," Margaret announced brightly, making a check mark on her clipboard. "Your property line is now in compliance with Timber Shores standards." "Have a wonderful day, Henry." The crew loaded up and rumbled away, leaving me standing in my yard surrounded by the few possessions I'd managed to salvage. I looked out at the lake, at the empty space where my dock had been, and felt a rage so intense I had to sit down. But as I stared at the water, something occurred to me, something that made my anger shift into something else entirely. I pulled up the Timber Shores community map on my phone, the one they'd given me when I bought the house. I zoomed in on the lake, tracing the shoreline with my finger. My property was at the southern end of the community, where a small inlet connected to the main body of Lake Martin. The inlet was part of the HOA's common area, and the only public boat launch for the entire development was right next to where my dock had been. Or rather, where my dock had been was the boat launch. I started laughing, a slightly manic sound that probably would have concerned anyone who heard it. See, when I'd bought the property, the previous owner had explained that the dock served a dual purpose. He'd built it with extra width and reinforced pilings because he'd made an agreement with the HOA to allow it to function as the community boat launch. In exchange, he paid reduced HOA fees. That agreement had transferred to me when I bought the house. I pulled up my property documents, scrolling through until I found it. There, in the addendum to the sale contract, buyer assumes existing agreement with Timber Shores HOA regarding shared use of dock structure for community boat launch. HOA fee reduction of $150/month applies as long as dock remains accessible to HOA members. The dock that Margaret had just demolished wasn't just my private dock. It was the only way for anyone in the Timber Shores community to launch a boat into Lake Martin. I called Tom back. "I need you to look at Section 12 of my property addendum, the one about the dock." There was a pause as he pulled up the file, then he started laughing. "Oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. Henry, do you realize what this means?" "It means about 200 angry homeowners are going to figure out they can't use their boats this weekend. It means the HOA just destroyed their own community amenity without proper authorization. This isn't just an aesthetic dispute anymore. This is destruction of shared property. And you have video evidence of the whole thing." I spent the rest of the day digging through documents and making phone calls. By evening, I had a complete picture of just how badly Margaret and her board had screwed up. The original dock agreement dated back to 2008, when the development was first built. The developer had worked out a deal with the lakefront property owner to create shared lake access, which had been a major selling point for the entire community. That agreement was referenced in every single property deed in Timber Shores. More importantly, the agreement specified that any modifications to the dock structure required not just HOA approval, but approval from the lakefront property owner, which was now me, and that the dock couldn't be removed without providing alternative lake access for community members. Margaret had violated the foundational covenants of the entire development. The next morning, I went down to the lake early, coffee in hand, and waited. It was Saturday, prime boating day. Sure enough, around 8 o'clock, the first truck pulling a boat trailer came down the community access road. I recognized the driver, a guy named Bill who lived 3 streets over. He pulled up to where the dock had been, got out of his truck, and just stood there staring at the empty space. "What the hell?" he shouted to no one in particular. I walked over. "HOA demolished it yesterday. Aesthetic violations." "But this is the boat launch. How are we supposed to get our boats in the water?" I shrugged. "You'd have to ask Margaret Sullivan about that." Within an hour, there were 6 trucks with boat trailers clustered around my property, and a growing crowd of very angry homeowners. I'd pulled a lawn chair down near the water and was enjoying my second cup of coffee and the show. Someone had called Margaret because her Mercedes came flying down the road at 9:30, gravel spraying as she slammed on the brakes. "What's going on here?" she demanded, climbing out of her car. "Where's the boat launch, Margaret?" Bill asked, his face red. "We're supposed to have lake access. That's why we pay HOA fees." "The old dock was a violation of our aesthetic standards," Margaret said, clutching her ever-present clipboard. "We're working on a plan for a new, compliant community dock." "When?" someone else shouted. "Summer's already here. I've got people coming to visit next weekend specifically to go boating." Margaret's smile was getting strained. "These things take time. We need to get proper permits, hire contractors, review bids. The board is meeting next Wednesday to discuss options." "You didn't need any of that to tear down the dock we already had." The crowd was getting more agitated. I stayed in my lawn chair, sipping coffee and saying nothing. This wasn't my fight to have. I was just the guy whose property they'd destroyed. "The previous dock was unsafe and non-compliant," Margaret insisted, her voice rising. "The board made the decision in the best interest of the community." "Did the board know it was our only boat launch?" Bill demanded. Margaret's expression flickered. Just for a second, uncertainty crossed her face. "Of course we knew. We have complete records of all community amenities." But I caught that flicker and I knew. She hadn't known. She'd been so focused on enforcing her aesthetic vision that she'd never bothered to check what the dock was actually used for. The crowd argued with her for another 20 minutes before dispersing. A lot of angry phone calls being made and threats of lawsuits being thrown around. Margaret shot me a venomous look before climbing back into her Mercedes and driving off. Tom called me that afternoon with news. "I filed for an emergency restraining order against the HOA, and I'm preparing a lawsuit for destruction of property, breach of contract, and violation of the community covenants. But Henry, I have to tell you, this is going to get expensive. We're talking months of litigation, maybe years." "How expensive?" $30,000, $40,000, possibly more, and that's if we win. If we lose, you're out that money, plus you still don't have a dock. I sat on my back porch, looking out at the lake. I'd bought this place because I loved the water, loved fishing and boating and the peaceful Alabama summers. I'd sunk my savings into it, and now I was looking at throwing more money into a legal fight that might bankrupt me. "What are my odds?" I asked. "Honestly, pretty good." "They screwed up badly, but nothing's guaranteed in court. Let's do it." The restraining order hearing was set for the following Tuesday. In the meantime, word spread through timber shores like wildfire. By Sunday evening, I'd had 17 different homeowners stop by my house, some to express sympathy, some to ask what I was doing about it, and some to yell at me for not maintaining the dock better so it wouldn't have been torn down in the first place. That last group was special. Apparently, some people had decided that this was somehow my fault for having a non-compliant dock. Never mind that the dock had been there for 15 years before I bought the property and had been inspected and approved by the county multiple times. On Monday, I got a letter from the HOA's lawyer demanding that I provide alternative lake access for community members immediately or face fines of $1,000 per day. I forwarded it to Tom, who called me back within 10 minutes, laughing so hard he could barely speak. They want you to provide lake access after they destroyed your dock. This is insane. I've never seen an HOA this incompetent. What do I do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You have no obligation to provide anything. They destroyed the amenity, not you. Just sit tight until the hearing. Tuesday morning, I put on my only suit and met Tom at the Tallapoosa County Courthouse. The HOA was represented by a lawyer named Patricia Crane, a severe woman in her 50s who looked like she ate nails for breakfast. Margaret was there too, along with 2 other board members, a man named Robert Chen and a woman named Susan Davis. The judge, a tired-looking man named Judge Matthews, reviewed the filings with the expression of someone who'd seen way too many HOA disputes in his career. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said, peering over his reading glasses. The HOA demolished a dock on Mr. Harrington's property, claiming it violated aesthetic guidelines. But this dock also served as the community's only boat launch, which was established by covenant when the development was created. And now, the HOA is demanding that Mr. Harrington provide alternative lake access while simultaneously suing him for having a non-compliant structure. Is that accurate? Your Honor, the situation is more complex than that, Patricia began, but Judge Matthews held up his hand. I'm going to issue a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from assessing any fines against Mr. Harrington related to this matter until we can sort this out properly. Miss Crane, your clients need to understand that they can't destroy community amenities and then blame individual homeowners for the consequences. We'll schedule a full hearing for 3 weeks from now. In the meantime, I strongly suggest the parties attempt to reach a settlement. Outside the courthouse, Tom was grinning. That went well. The judge clearly thinks the HOA is in the wrong. So what happens now? Now we wait and see if they're smart enough to settle or stupid enough to keep fighting. They chose stupid. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation in Timber Shores deteriorated rapidly. The summer boating season was in full swing, and nearly half the homeowners in the development owned boats. Without the dock, they had no way to launch them. The nearest public boat launch was 12 miles away on a different part of the lake, which meant an extra 40-minute drive each way. People were furious, and that fury was directed squarely at the HOA board. The community Facebook page, which usually featured posts about lost cats and recommendations for landscapers, turned into a war zone. Homeowners were demanding the board's resignation, demanding immediate construction of a new dock, demanding refunds on their HOA fees. Margaret tried to maintain control, posting updates about how the board was exploring options and reviewing contractor bids. But every update just made people angrier, because it became increasingly clear that the board had no actual plan for replacing the dock they destroyed. I stayed out of it, mostly. I answered questions when people asked me directly, but I didn't engage in the Facebook drama or attend the emergency HOA meetings that Margaret kept calling. My lawyer had advised me to maintain a low profile and let the HOA dig their own grave, and dig they did. 10 days after the restraining order hearing, Margaret and the board approved an emergency expenditure of $75,000 to build a new community dock on HOA common property. The problem was, there wasn't any suitable HOA common property with lake access. The only waterfront the HOA owned was a narrow 10-foot strip of land that had been designated as a nature preserve, with covenants specifically prohibiting any construction. When the contractor they'd hired showed up and realized the situation, he refused to do the work, explaining that building on protected land would violate state environmental regulations and put his license at risk. Margaret's solution was to try to build the dock anyway, hiring a different contractor who was apparently less concerned with things like permits and regulations. That contractor lasted exactly 1 day before a county inspector showed up, issued a stop work order, and slapped the HOA with a $10,000 fine for unpermitted construction in a protected zone. The Facebook page exploded again. Homeowners were now facing a special assessment of $500 each to cover the fine and the wasted money paid to contractors. On top of that, they still didn't have a boat launch. I got a call from Susan Davis, one of the other board members, on a Thursday evening. "Henry, I need to talk to you. Can I come by?" She showed up 10 minutes later looking exhausted. Susan was in her early 60s, a retired teacher who'd gotten roped into the HOA board because no one else wanted to do it. "I want to apologize," she said, sitting on my porch. "This whole thing is a disaster, and it's not what I thought we were doing." When Margaret proposed updating the aesthetic guidelines, she made it sound like we were just going to send out notices about paint colors and lawn maintenance. I had no idea she was planning to actually demolish anything, and I certainly didn't know your dock was our boat launch. "Did Margaret know?" I asked. Susan sighed. "I think she genuinely didn't. She was so focused on making the neighborhood look like some magazine spread that she never bothered to check what things were actually for. And now she's in too deep to admit she made a mistake, so she just keeps making it worse." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Robert and I want to settle with you. We want to resign from the board and help fix this mess. But Margaret has the other 2 board members in her pocket, and they're refusing to authorize any settlement. They think if they just keep fighting, they'll eventually win." I leaned back in my chair. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know what it would take for you to agree to rebuild the dock and restore the lake access. Not because you have to, but because the community needs it. And I want to help make that happen, even if it means going against Margaret." I thought about it. The truth was, I wanted my dock back. I missed being able to walk out my back door and onto the water. I missed early morning fishing and evening sunset cruises. But I also wasn't about to let the HOA walk all over me. I want the HOA to pay for rebuilding the dock exactly as it was. I want it in writing that I have complete control over the design and construction. I want all my legal fees covered, and I want a formal apology from the board, read aloud at a community meeting. Susan nodded. "That's fair." "More than fair, honestly. Let me talk to Robert and see what we can do." 3 days later, I got a call from a homeowner named Greg Hammond. I didn't know him well, but I'd chatted with him a few times at community events. "Henry, I'm organizing a petition to recall the HOA board. We've got over 100 signatures already, which is more than enough under our bylaws. I wanted to give you a heads up because things are about to get interesting." The recall petition was officially submitted on Monday morning. Under the Timber Shores HOA bylaws, A recall election had to be held within 30 days of a valid petition being submitted. Margaret tried to fight it, claiming the petition was invalid due to technical errors. But the Homeowners Association lawyer, after reviewing the bylaws, confirmed that the petition met all requirements. Margaret was furious. She sent out a mass email to all homeowners, claiming that the recall was being organized by disgruntled individuals who don't understand the complexities of community management, and that removing the board would leave the neighborhood in chaos. She accused me by name of manipulating people to avoid taking responsibility for my own violations. That email was a mistake. Tom immediately filed a defamation claim against Margaret personally, not just the HOA. She stepped over the line, he explained to me. She's making false statements about you in writing, distributed to hundreds of people. That's textbook defamation, and it's going to cost her. The recall election was scheduled for a Saturday 3 weeks away. In the meantime, the full hearing on my lawsuit against the HOA was set for the following Monday. Everything was converging at once. I spent those weeks documenting everything, organizing my evidence and preparing for trial. Tom deposed Margaret and the other board members, and the transcripts were fascinating. Margaret stuck to her story that the dock had been a clear violation and that the board had acted appropriately. But when Tom asked her specific questions about the boat launch agreement, about the community covenants, about whether she'd consulted with a lawyer before ordering the demolition, her answers got vaguer and more defensive. Robert Chen admitted in his deposition that he'd abstained from the vote to demolish the dock because he wasn't sure it was legal. Susan Davis testified that she'd voted against it and had warned Margaret that it might cause problems. The other 2 board members, a man named Kyle Foster and a woman named Jennifer Wright, both claimed they'd relied on Margaret's expertise and hadn't independently reviewed the relevant documents. It was becoming clear that Margaret had pushed this through on her own authority, convincing the other board members to go along without doing their due diligence. The Saturday of the recall election, I voted early and then made myself scarce. I didn't want to be the focus of attention. This wasn't about me getting revenge on the board. This was about the community taking back control from people who'd abused their authority. By evening, the results were in. Margaret, Kyle, and Jennifer had all been recalled by overwhelming margins. Robert and Susan, who'd both publicly apologized for their roles in the dock demolition and promised to work toward a settlement, were allowed to stay on the board. 3 new members were elected, including Greg Hammond, who'd organized the petition. The new board's first official act was to authorize a settlement with me. They offered to pay for complete reconstruction of the dock, reimburse all my legal fees to date, and issue a formal apology. In exchange, I would agree to maintain the shared boat launch arrangement under the original terms. I agreed. It was everything I'd asked for, and it meant I could finally start putting this nightmare behind me. But Margaret wasn't done. She showed up at my house the next day, her face twisted with rage. "You've ruined everything. Do you know how hard I worked to improve this community? How much time I spent developing those guidelines? And you destroyed it all because you were too cheap and lazy to build a proper dock. Margaret, you need to leave my property. I'm not going anywhere until you admit that this is your fault. You and your hideous dock and your refusal to follow simple rules." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Margaret, I'm asking you one more time to leave." She slapped the phone out of my hand. "Stop hiding behind your lawyer and your cameras and face me like a man." That was assault. I called the police. The Tallapoosa County Sheriff's deputy who responded took statements from both of us. Margaret insisted that I'd provoked her, that I'd threatened her, that she was the real victim in all of this. I showed the deputy the video from my doorbell camera, which had captured the whole encounter. The deputy arrested Margaret for assault and criminal trespass. As she was being put in the back of the patrol car, she was screaming that I'd pay for this, that she'd sue me for everything I had, that I'd regret the day I moved to Timber Shores. I picked up my phone from where it had fallen in the grass and went back inside. I was shaking, not from fear but from the sheer absurdity of it all. This woman had destroyed my property, lied to the community, wasted thousands of dollars in HOA funds, and she still thought she was the victim. Tom called me an hour later. I just heard about Margaret's arrest. Henry, this actually helps us. It demonstrates a pattern of harassment and irrational behavior. If she'd just left well enough alone, she might have gotten away with a slap on the wrist. Now she's facing criminal charges on top of everything else. The trial for my civil lawsuit went forward as scheduled. With Margaret in legal trouble and the new HOA board already having authorized a settlement, it was largely a formality. The judge reviewed the evidence, the depositions, the video of the dock demolition, and the original property agreements. His ruling was comprehensive and scathing. He found that the HOA had violated the community covenants, breached their contract with me, and destroyed property without proper authority. He awarded me full damages for the dock replacement, all legal fees, and an additional $25,000 in punitive damages for the HOA's reckless and willful disregard for established agreements and proper procedures. He also issued an injunction requiring the HOA to update their architectural guidelines to ensure they couldn't conflict with existing property agreements, and mandating that all board members complete training on HOA law and management before making any major decisions. Margaret, personally, was ordered to pay my legal fees related to the defamation claim, another $15,000. The dock reconstruction began in early July. I hired the same contractor who'd built the original dock, and we rebuilt it to the exact specifications as before. The HOA paid for everything, just as the settlement required. The work took 3 weeks, and when it was finished, I had a beautiful, sturdy dock extending out into Lake Martin, with a reinforced section for the community boat launch. The first weekend after completion, I was out on my dock when Bill pulled up with his boat trailer. "She looks good, Henry. Really good. Thanks. Want to help me christen it? I've got beer in the cooler." We spent the afternoon fishing off the end of the dock, watching other homeowners come and go with their boats, everyone visibly relieved to finally have lake access again. People waved as they passed, called out thanks, stopped to chat. It felt like the community was healing. Margaret pleaded no contest to the assault charge and received a sentence of probation and anger management classes. She moved out of Timber Shores 2 months later, selling her house at a loss and relocating somewhere in Georgia. I heard through the grapevine that she was already complaining about her new HOA not maintaining standards properly. The new HOA board, led by Greg Hammond as president with Susan Davis as vice president, took a completely different approach to community management. They focused on actual issues like road maintenance, drainage problems, and organizing neighborhood events. The aesthetic guidelines were revised to be advisory rather than mandatory, and the Architectural Review Committee was restructured to include input from affected homeowners before any decisions were made. My reduced HOA fees were restored as per the original agreement in exchange for maintaining the shared boat launch access. I didn't mind. The dock was meant to be used, and I liked seeing families enjoying the lake on summer weekends. Tom sent me his final bill in August. Between the court award and the settlement, Everything was covered, and I actually came out slightly ahead financially. More importantly, I had my dock back, my peace of mind restored, and the satisfaction of knowing that an out-of-control HOA had been held accountable. One evening in late September, as summer was fading into fall, I was sitting on my dock with my nephew, teaching him how to tie fishing knots. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the water was perfectly calm. "Uncle Henry," my nephew asked, "why did that lady tear down your dock in the first place?" I thought about how to explain it in terms an 8-year-old would understand. Sometimes people get so focused on how they think things should be that they forget to think about how things actually are. They forget that rules are supposed to help people, not hurt them. "That's dumb," I laughed. "Yeah, buddy, it really is." The whole experience had taught me a lot about the power of homeowners associations and the danger of letting people with no accountability make decisions that affect entire communities. HOAs serve an important purpose when they're run properly, maintaining common areas, organizing services, creating a framework for neighbors to cooperate. But when they're run by people more interested in control than service, they can become tyrannical nightmares. I'd been lucky. I had the resources to fight back, both financially and legally. I had documentation proving my case. I had a community that eventually rallied against the HOA's overreach. Not everyone in an HOA dispute is that fortunate. The lawsuit and its aftermath had also revealed some interesting things about Timber Shore's finances. During discovery, Tom had uncovered evidence that Margaret had been mismanaging HOA funds for months, not just in the dock demolition, but in other areas. She'd been approving expenditures without proper board authorization, hiring her brother-in-law's landscaping company at inflated rates, and generally treating the HOA budget like her personal slush fund. The new board hired a forensic accountant who found approximately $40,000 in questionable expenses during Margaret's tenure as president. Some of it was recoverable through insurance and lawsuits against the vendors who'd colluded with her. Some of it was just gone, lost to incompetence and possible corruption. The board filed a complaint with the Alabama Attorney General's office, which opened an investigation into Margaret's management of the HOA. I didn't know what would come of that, but I hoped it would at least prevent her from weaseling her way into another HOA board position somewhere else. By October, life in Timber Shores had largely returned to normal. The drama had faded, replaced by the usual concerns of suburban life. Halloween decorations were going up, people were planning for the holidays, and the community Facebook page was back to posts about lost pets and garage sales. I celebrated the 6-month anniversary of the dock's reconstruction by taking my boat out for a long cruise around Lake Martin. It was a perfect autumn day, cool and clear, with the leaves just starting to turn. I cut the engine in the middle of the lake and just drifted for a while, enjoying the silence and the peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Just heard Margaret's facing fraud charges from the AG's office. They found evidence she embezzled HOA funds. Thought you'd want to know." I read the message twice, then put my phone away. I didn't feel vindicated or pleased. I just felt tired. Margaret had started this whole mess because she wanted the neighborhood to look a certain way, because she valued aesthetics over people, rules over relationships. And in the end, she'd lost everything, her position, her reputation, possibly her freedom. It was a waste, all of it. The time, the money, the stress, the anger. It could have all been avoided if she'd just taken 5 minutes to check what the dock was actually used for before ordering it demolished. If she'd had a conversation instead of issuing an edict. If she'd treated the homeowners as partners instead of subjects. But that wasn't who Margaret was. She was someone who needed control, who needed to be right, who couldn't admit mistakes. And people like that, when given even a small amount of power, can cause incredible damage. I started the boat's engine and headed back toward shore, toward my dock, toward home. As I approached, I saw a couple of neighbors fishing off the community section of the dock, their kids playing in the shallow water nearby. One of them waved and I waved back. This was what community was supposed to be. People sharing space, respecting each other's property, working together to maintain something that benefited everyone. Not perfect, not always easy, but fundamentally based on mutual respect and common sense. I tied up the boat and secured it for the evening, then grabbed my cooler and headed up to the house. The legal battle was over. The dock was rebuilt. The HOA had been reformed. Justice, in its slow and imperfect way, had been served, and I could finally just enjoy my lake house in peace. The following spring brought news that Margaret had accepted a plea deal on the fraud charges. She pleaded guilty to misappropriation of funds and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, suspended to 6 months with the remainder on probation, plus full restitution to the HOA. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Alabama. The Timber Shores HOA used the restitution money to fund long overdue repairs to the community's entrance sign and lighting, and to establish a reserve fund for future dock maintenance. Greg Hammond and the new board instituted quarterly financial reports and required all expenditures over $5,000 to be approved by membership vote, not just board decision. I was asked to join the Architectural Review Committee, which felt ironic given that the whole mess had started with architectural complaints. I accepted, figuring I could help ensure the committee focused on legitimate safety and maintenance issues rather than aesthetic witch hunts. My first act on the committee was to propose that all architectural guidelines include a mandatory review period where affected homeowners could provide input before any enforcement action was taken. The proposal passed unanimously. In June, the community held its annual summer kickoff party at the lake, the first one since the dock demolition. The new board had organized games for kids, a barbecue, and a fishing tournament. I donated the use of my dock for the tournament weigh-in station. Bill won the tournament with a massive largemouth base. During the awards ceremony, Greg made a point of thanking everyone who'd helped rebuild trust in the community after last year's difficulties. And he specifically mentioned my willingness to work with the new board despite everything that had happened. People applauded, and I felt genuinely appreciated. Not for fighting the HOA, but for being willing to move forward and help make things better. That night, after everyone had left and the sun was setting over the lake, I sat on my dock with a beer and thought about the past year. It had been the most stressful, expensive, and frustrating experience of my adult life. I'd been angry, anxious, and at times completely overwhelmed by the absurdity of fighting my own homeowners association over a dock that should never have been demolished in the first place. But I'd learned a lot. About HOA law, about standing up for myself, about the importance of documentation and proper legal representation, about community dynamics and how quickly things can go wrong when the wrong people get power. About the difference between rules that serve people and rules that control them. I'd also learned that I was tougher than I thought. I'd stood up to bullying and intimidation. I'd fought a legal battle against an organization with more resources than me and won. I'd helped reform a broken system instead of just walking away, and most importantly, I'd kept my home. My lake house, my dock, my piece of Alabama waterfront paradise. The place I'd worked so hard to afford, the place I'd dreamed about during years of saving and planning. It was still mine, and no one was going to take it away. A fish jumped near the end of the dock, breaking the surface of the water with a splash. I smiled and took another sip of beer. Tomorrow I'd go fishing. Maybe I'd invite Bill and some other neighbors. Maybe I'd just go by myself and enjoy the quiet. Either way, I'd be launching my boat from my own dock, on my own property, in my own time. Exactly as it should be. The Alabama sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, reflecting off the calm water of Lake Martin. Somewhere in the distance, a boat motor hummed and birds called from the trees along the shore. It was peaceful. It was perfect. It was home, and no HOA in the world was ever going to change that again.